I love this church. I don't think I'm alone in that feeling. One of my favorite experiences here at the church is when I get into conversations with many of you that I've had conversations with on this very topic, which is, what drew you to Fountain Street Church? What does it mean to you? Why is it important to you? I'm sure many of you have had those conversations, and they're wonderful because they lead to a deepening of our thinking and an affirmation of the values and qualities that bring us here, and of the deepening spirit that that happens because we have this community. It occurs on Sunday mornings during the season when Fred invites people to engage in helping with the welcome to Fountain Street Church, and we get to hear people's stories about what brought them here or what this church means to them. It reflects a yearning for a spiritual community that I think exists in all of us. And I think that's a very important value for those of us who are liberals. There's kind of a contradiction there, too. Liberal, free-thinking, independent, do my own thing, trust my own thoughts, go deeper. But that process is so strongly enhanced by a community that supports us in many ways. I mean, think of the many ways in which we are enabled to go deeper because of our community here, be it the architecture, the art, the music, the ideas, the preaching, the book clubs, the social action groups, how we help one another over time in this church deepens us as a community and allows us as individuals to go deeper on our journey, on our liberal, independent journey. So that's a great contradiction. I think that's one piece of why this has been called the impossible church, is that combination and that essential need for community to go further in our individual free search. And I think that makes sense because, existentially, we're all alone. But also, reality-wise, none of us is alone. None of us is born into a world where we can nourish and raise ourselves, certainly for the first number of years of life. So the resources and the need for community to support individual growth, I think, is true for us on a biological level, as well as on a philosophical, interpersonal, social, intellectual, emotional level. Another thing the community provides is rituals that enhance our life experience and allows us to hold on to that liberal free thinking when we go through individual challenging experiences. And they may be positive experiences such as birth and marriage, or they could be losses, death, divorces. But the rituals of life around here also support us in that individual, ultimately lonely, ultimately social journey that we engage in. We become stronger and more confident as individuals because of the support of the community. Certainly was true for me. I love telling my story, and I'm up here, so I get to. I came from a very traditional, fundamental, Christian Reformed, I'll say it, background. And obviously, I don't have to tell people here how that can be very limiting and narrowing and life-taking. I also want to point out that it's also very affirming to be raised in an institution like that has one unified belief system that gives meaning to life, that says we are connected, that says we are responsible, that says we do make choices in the world, and we need to, we're called to fulfill that. So, you know, losing that community as I moved away from it, you know, I lost that support system. I lost the comfort. I lost the celebrations that meant to me. And so that was a great loss, because I am somebody who appreciates that kind of support. And I don't think I'm alone in that. On the other hand, it was wonderful as I started as an individual, as a young adult, going to college and graduate school and meeting people in my 20s in my life, to be open to the amazing, wonderful ideas that could go so much deeper when there wasn't this ultimate God who was in charge of everything, but there was this limitless mystery that you always could find more about. I've talked about it before, but Wendell Berry is an author that I just found wonderful at that time in my life. Another popular book at that time that I found very meaningful was The Denial of Death by Ernst Becker. And I had some friends who were on that sort of journey, but it was all these individual pieces out there that were helping me along. And then I was introduced to Fountain Street. And I found this community that was on that kind of individual journey. And we could sing, celebrate, enjoy the wonder of life together. So this community is so valuable because of that. And it is a paradox. Again, I want to say there's so many paradoxes involved here, which I think is really, the deeper I go into anything, whether it's physics and chemistry or philosophy or human relationships, the more the paradoxes become apparent, the more deep and closer to the truth I think we are. Okay. So that the community of the Christian Reformed Church did lay a foundation of an expectation of myself, of creating deep spiritual meaning and belonging in life, that interconnectedness that was spoken about in the meditation. And that still has an influence on me. That's partly why this church means so much to me, because of that deep call and that expectation of life and of myself, that we're connected and that things have meaning and that we're responsible to be conscious of and meet that meaning. Wasn't me. So without those intellectual and spiritual sources, I don't think I could go as deep. And the other part of that, too, is it's really frightening at times. And I think this is what the existential aloneness of life talks about, is it scary, to face death alone and to face uncertainty and uncertain meaning in life alone. And being in community doesn't eliminate that fear, doesn't eliminate that aloneness, but it does something that I can't quite put my finger on that's extremely valuable. We're not in this alone. Many of us have had the benefit of raising children in Fountain Street Church. A few of us have had the benefit of being raised in Fountain Street Church. I just want to tell two stories about my children, one of whom, Kurt, when he was doing the coming of age experience where they get up in front of the church and they share their search, their process, their meaning right now. He's up there. At the time I was on the board, and he's up and he's talking about how it's difficult to be raised by parents who are liberals, because what are you supposed to rebel against? And then he went on to talk about, well, he did rebel against his cohorts at school, at a fairly conservative school system. That's how he acted out a lot of his his questioning and rebelling. Plus, he grew his hair long because he knew his mother was bothered by it. That was the not outrageous mother in me, I guess. My daughter, when I was talking about preparing for this sermon, shared with me how when she was in high school, she had studied ballet with Grand Rapids Ballet for many years, but never quite made it to the senior company. But then a young woman in her 20s who was a wonderful young woman who had studied ballet, was forming a company, and asked Kristen to try out for that company, which she did. And she really liked that woman as a artist and also as a human being, and was very excited that she was accepted in that company, and they offered a stipend to help, get some financial reward from that. They also requested something with that, which was that you sign a form that said that you accepted Jesus as your personal Savior. Which relates to this whole theme, right? The control, that our church exists without that kind of control. But that's not always the case. She thought it through and thought about what this church meant to her, the experience of Tower Club and Fountain Club, and just being part of this as a young woman. And she said, no, I can't do that. And we talked about it. We said, well, you can just be dishonest. Who cares, But she couldn't do that because of, I could have, I said, do what you want to do. But she couldn't. She made that kind of a decision. And I think that relates. The same thing is true of my son, that wonder of the self-consciousness and self-awareness that he had about himself at that fairly young age. And he continues to exhibit that. Both my kids do in their lives. So this kind of supportive community is extremely valuable. Now I'm getting to the more difficult part of the sermon, which is I believe that our community is based on traditional liberal optimism. It was referred to in the reading that human beings, as we get to understand things more deeply, learn more, become better, are going to become better as a race, as a group. And that kind of optimism is what was challenged by the experience of World War II for James Luther Adams and for a lot of people. And another example of that liberal optimism I think of when I think back in I don't know when it was, maybe in the 80s, we started talking about having a donation of record as a condition of membership. And a lot of us, myself included, being a liberal optimist, really questioned moving in that direction. We believed that as people go deeper, as they become connected to this church, they're going to naturally want to support the institution because we're going to see the value of it, and we're going to call forth from ourselves deeper, better things. Others were saying, no, people need to know there's obligations with being part of an institution. So there was that dynamic going on. And of course we did, and it's just a little thing that we ask, is that as a member that you have a donation of record now. But I think it's an interesting story. But the other part of the story, and this is what I think Fountain Street doesn't do well with, is during that time that we just had that liberal optimism that we're going to survive because people are so good and they want to support this church, we had a charismatic leader, and more than one actually, who had wonderful relations with extremely well-to-do individuals in the community. And if we had financial difficulties, I think this was true for the choir and their leader, as well as for the church as a whole and their leader, they knew how to tap resources. So in truth, this liberal idealism wasn't being lived out. We were living because of other things we didn't really talk about, but they were there. And my fear is that that's just one little example, but our liberal optimism as a church makes it very difficult to talk about problems within the church. We haven't established a method. We haven't established an ethos. We haven't established mores or values that say, we're going to disagree with each other. We're going to really dislike each other sometimes. We're going to feel threatened by each other. And how are we going to deal with that? Unfortunately, and there's ways of doing that. I mean, there's ways of doing that in community. I know there's ways of doing that in my personal community with my husband. You know, there's times we get upset with each other. Might be hard to believe because we're both so wonderful, but it's true. And over the years, we've had to really work at this and to really study this and to develop methods. We didn't do this on our own. We did this with support. We used outside resources to do it. And now we have a method and a value in our marriage that when we come into hard times, we know how to deal with it, and we have a way to deal with it, and we believe it's important. And that deepens and enriches our relationship. We don't always have to be nice to each other because we trust that when we're not feeling nice, we have a way of working it through because of what we've learned and what we apply. And I'm so grateful for that. But it takes looking at and experiencing and honestly feeling the negativity that can emerge in our relationship. And I would apply that to a church also.